This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension on Friday last, this Honourable Chamber was debating the Appropriation Bill 2026 in Standing Finance Committee. We return to the Standing Finance Committee.
Good morning, honorable members and guests. This House is now in Standing Finance Committee.
Mr. Chairman, Ministry of Labour, Social Security and Third Sector.
Honorable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I beg leave to enter the well of this chamber along with my officers from the ministry.
Permission granted, honorable member.
Mr. Chairman, Head 84, Ministry of Labour, Social Security and Third Sector, in the amount of $20,476,014.
Thank you. I will invite the Honorable Member for St. Peter to give his opening remarks, but before I do, let me outline for the benefit of the public officers who may be here for the first time and for the benefit of the honorable members, the procedure that governs these sessions. Honorable Member of St. Peter, who is the substantive minister, is given 10 minutes for the introductory remarks, comments. Thereafter, he's given, for each question that may be posed to him, 5 minutes to respond, and or you may direct an officer from your ministry to give the response, in which case the officer will give their name and the position in the ministry, and they have 3 minutes to respond. Honorable members would indicate their intention to pose a question, entitled a question, and which is within 3 minutes. If you utilize your full 3 minutes with preamble, well, then we will have to move on. In other words, you cannot take 3 minutes for preamble to the question and then ask the question or expect additional time for the questions. So it is 3 minutes which you will have the privilege to utilize however you wish, but it is not both of both worlds. Thereafter, you can ask a supplementary question, three supplementary questions, a question that aligns with the first question that you have asked. It cannot be a separate and totally distinct question from what you asked at first. That is when you allow the three supplementary questions. If you don't have any questions, any supplementary questions, we would then move on. You indicate by the raising of your tile, ensure it catches my attention so that we do not have members who would have indicated they wanted to ask a question and then they're waiting for an exceptionally long time. Just ensure that you catch my eye. For the honorable members to my right, on the back bench, sometimes because of the person sitting in front of you, I'm unable to see your tile, so just for sure, you make sure that I can see it. Honorable Member for St. Peter, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have the pleasure, the honor, and it is my responsibility to lead a team, most of whom I've become very familiar with over the past 7+ years, a hardworking team that has done significant work on behalf of the people of this country, particularly on behalf of the workers of the country and on behalf of civil society, the third sector. The estimates that we discussed today speak to continuing that work, intensifying the work done by the ministry over those years. And that work centers around the provision of decent work, both locally and overseas. It speaks to our interaction with the National Insurance and Social Security Service. It also speaks to third sector development, working with faith-based organizations, developing philanthropy, and strengthening our social dialogue systems. I will use this opportunity to remind this honorable chamber of some of the work that we have done over the years and also speak to what we are continuing, intensifying, and then there are a few new areas that we will be moving into. Now, our mantra, and this mantra came out of a discussion I had with the honorable member for St. Michael's South Central, but the mantra that I use and that we use is protection and production. And the vision that we have, again, comes out of a discussion with a member from the other place, the minister responsible for industry and innovation. And that is creating a Barbados that is the best place to work, to contribute or give back, and to retire. Now, under the umbrella of worker protection and the provision of decent work, we have, over the past few years, legislated the prevention of discrimination in relation to employment. We've created the Job Start Plus program as a national first jobs initiative. We've established rates of pay and conditions of work for workers in construction businesses who are engaged under contracts paid for by taxpayers. We have legislated that workers in establishments receiving concessions from the state must adhere to certain standards in terms of rates of pay and conditions of work. We've established rates of pay and conditions of work specifically for the hotel sector. We established a full-time tribunal under the Employment Rights Act. We created a framework that provides grants to organizations that wish to retrofit premises to allow for the employment of people with disabilities. We've also created occupational safety and health regulations for some areas, including the provision of personal protective equipment, noise, the provision of drinking water, the provision of toilet facilities, just to name a few. We've provided special protections for workers in petrol stations. We've worked with the BWU, Barbados Workers Union, to establish a national workplace wellness policy, and we've implemented a strong program, including an annual forum. We re-established an overseas worker program in the United States of America. We helped to create the Barbados Job Register, and we manage that register. We oversaw the practical implementation of full free movement with Belize, Dominica, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we established for the first time in Barbados a national minimum wage and increased it on 2 occasions. With respect to Social Security, we have provided and administered the program for special needs grants for additional categories. There were 2 categories before, but we've added some additional, including autism, people with advanced multiple sclerosis, Down syndrome. We've introduced the concept of family leave and provided for 3 weeks paid paternity leave for fathers. We've extended maternity leave, paid maternity leave for mothers by 2 weeks, with an additional 3 weeks in situations of multiple births. We have put measures in place to revitalize the national insurance scheme to ensure its sustainability. We've improved the governance of the Social Security Organization, and we have established a self-employed unit in the National Insurance and Social Security Service. In the area of the third sector, we've organized and executed many capacity building interventions. We've worked with third sector organizations to develop a philanthropy portal. We set up the Social Justice Committee and facilitated the involvement of third sector organizations in policy formulation. We also provided grants for third sector organizations to assist them in funding projects that are of national benefit. And we facilitated annual symposia for leaders of faith-based organizations to build relationships, to share experiences, and also ultimately to learn from each other. In the area of social dialogue, we've coordinated meetings of the full social partnership as well as the subcommittee of the social partnership to address areas of national concern. We coordinated the creation and the signing of the Declaration of Mission Barbados. We coordinated the preparation of a draft of Protocol 7, and we've led the Caribbean governments in setting the labor agenda at the International Labour Organization, and we've also led in the work of various ILO committees and International Labour Conference committees. There is some work that we've started that is not complete. There are amendments to the Employment Rights Act, legislation to effectively protect the pay of workers, creating new legislation to govern the recruitment of workers and how private employment agencies operate, establishing rules for the Employment Rights Tribunal, amending the Labour Clauses Public Contracts Act to better ensure that there is decent work, particularly in projects funded by taxpayers, creating legislation for the recognition of worker and employer organizations, actually launching the philanthropy portal. We are working in terms of finalizing the migrant labor protocol, establishing a new website, establishing a more modern labor market information system, finalizing the national minimum wage indexing model, having a home for the Employment Rights Tribunal, developing in conjunction with the Ministry of Training and Technical and Vocational Training, a new apprenticeship system that is in process. The work to realize the actual signing of Protocol 7, we are working to develop third sector legislation, and we are working on setting up regulations in our Social Security Organization to stop discouraging people with disabilities from moving into paid employment. We are also working on a work at height regulation. There are areas of new work. We've about to start work on providing grants to faith-based organizations to assist them with executing youth-related projects. You may recall that in our 2026 manifesto, we speak to a $5 million program, and we are about to start work on that. Establishing rates of pay and conditions of work in the wider construction sector, not just the areas related to taxpayer-funded contracts, but the wider sector. Developing and elevating the work of the care economy. Conducting research on the gig economy and on platform economy work. We are going to begin our work on developing a labor code, implementing our Decent Work Country program with the International Labour Organization, and developing a mechanism to determine a living wage for Barbados. These are some of the new areas, some outstanding from before and some related to the pledges, the commitment that we made in the manifesto of 2026. So, Mr. Chair, what I've shared represents our goals, and that goal is to ensure that in Barbados there is protection, there is production, and that we create ultimately a Barbados that is the best place to work, to contribute or give back, and to retire. Thank you very much. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I move that Head 84 stand part.
Thank you. Honourable member for St. James North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Let me at the onset thank the Honourable Member and the Minister with responsibility for Labour and his team for the work that they continue to do in driving labour and labour standards in our country, particularly at a time when the future of not just the country, but the health of the economy rests on having a labour force with a skill set anchored by 21st century skills. But of course, Mr. Chair, and through to the Honourable Member and Minister, there clearly is, as would have been outlined in other contributions in this estimates process, and further afield, issues of literacy. In the Ministry of Education, of course, we have been focusing with a certain degree of focus on ensuring that we can close the gap with respect to literacy and numeracy. But equally, outside of the school system, there are adults in our country who also must now close that gap in earnest. And I see under sub-program 573 in your estimates that there's a focus, of course, on adult literacy. Now, I'm mindful, of course, that there's a Ministry of Technological and Vocational Education, which also will be having its own literacy, adult literacy program. So I wanted to get a sense as to what partnership exists or would exist between the two ministries so as to ensure that there's a comprehensive national strategy for adult literacy in the country.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. The matter of adult literacy is, as you have indicated, a matter of importance, but literacy across the board, a matter of importance. We've seen the issue or the challenge raise its head when we attempt to work with adults to facilitate their movement into employment. And we recognize the challenge that people have. We also come face to face with the fact that adults have certain sensitivities that must be recognized. And I just want to say before I ask the program manager in our People Development, Implementation and Monitoring Unit to respond, to say that we've recognized that it presents a barrier, a real barrier to persons accessing, to people accessing both further education, accessing training, and being able to conduct themselves in a way that will allow for their advancement. Now, we recognize that the matter of adult literacy and addressing the matter is not just one for our ministry, and I'm pleased to say that we have, over the past, I would say maybe about 6 months, established a very good working relationship with the Ministry of Technological and Vocational Training. We've done some work together with respect to apprenticeships, but the chemistry is such that this working together will happen. Now, the People Development Advisory Council is also made up of persons from the Ministry of Technological and Vocational Training. And so whatever we do to advance this matter will include that ministry. But I spoke about the working relationship only to say that beyond the advisory council, the actual working together at the technical officers level has already started, whilst in a different area, but it portends very well to working on this matter, the matter of adult literacy, to make sure that we can get our people to a place where they feel good about themselves and where they're able to access the various opportunities that are available for them, or that could be available for them once they cross that hurdle. I will ask the program manager, Ms. Erica Watson, to share some more with respect to answering the question.
Thank you, Minister. Erica Watson, Program Manager for the People Development Program. I'll just add to what the Minister has said in that we work very closely with the Ministry of Tertiary Education and Training, and we also work with other ministries to address this issue of adult literacy. And in terms of our partnership with the Ministry of Tertiary Education, for example, they have been a key partner in what we're doing right now. Our focus has been developing a national strategy. And the reason why we focus on the planning and so on is because we recognize there are many stakeholders that will be involved in addressing adult literacy. And we need to have something that pulls them all together and facilitates the necessary coordination. So the Ministry of Tertiary Education has been a very active partner in that. They helped us in the design and right now the ongoing procurement of that consultancy. They will be key in terms of our work in implementing of it. But outside of that, what is going to come from that strategic plan, the policy, the strategy, and the action plan will inform their programming as much as it will inform ours. And this strategy is going to also involve some other ministries such as the Ministry of Youth and so on to really effectively tackle the issue of adult literacy. We do boast of a high literacy rate, and that's not wrong in the sense of how it is measured. We get that because of the level of education that person is acquiring up to secondary school and tertiary education. But the reality is, from labor's perspective, we're looking at functional literacy and the ability to have those skills that are needed to really capitalize on the opportunities in the labor market, so they be effective in the workplace, and to really realize their full potential in terms of having the necessary skills. So we have that indicator of, for example, over 40% of our adult population who have no certification. That's the closest thing that we have outside of a formal assessment of it. So it's definitely a real issue that we will be seeking to tackle with the development of this strategy and its subsequent implementation.
Thank you very much, Minister and your team. Chair, I just have one follow-up question to that one. Would be, you would have mentioned, Minister, the idea of partnerships, given, of course, the fact that, yes, the ministry leads on issues of labor, but there are other ministries and partners who have to help to build it out. And I'm happy that that was raised because, for example, when we look at the future skills for the country, when you look at countries in the Arab world, many in Asia, part of their model of future-proofing the skill set necessary is that there's a standing partnership with the Ministry of Responsibility for Labor, Ministry with Responsibility, or ministries with responsibility for education, but in addition, ministries that also are part of the productive sector. And why is that? If you use UAE for an example, that body meets quarterly to review where they're at in terms of meeting their objectives. So the curriculum that you see today in UAE is driven by where the country wants to go within the next 15, 20, 30 years of its national development. And therefore, you're preparing the skill set and workforce to be able to drive the economy and the country in that direction. And my question, therefore, to you would be, how do you see such a model working in Barbados so as to ensure that as we're preparing our young people in education for not just the workforce, but for business and the necessary skills that they're going to have to used to navigate Barbados, the region, and the world. How do you contemplate this year, for example, in this estimates process that we're in, for us to build out that type of strategic alignment with, one, the education system at the secondary level, certainly at the tertiary level, but you being the anchor in terms of labor standards, as well as the labor market to drive us within the next 15, 20 years of our development?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. A very good question. And it takes us to a place where we need to intensify our work and do that relatively quickly. Now, we took an approach previously that did not work very well. I'm going to answer in a number of areas before I ask the program manager to come back. We did, through a consultancy, some work to find out from industry what were their future needs. And because of my background in the business world, the answers that we got back did not surprise me, because running a day-to-day business or running the business from day to day, you're not often in a position to think about what you're expecting 5, 10, 15 years down the road. You train lots of times to keep yourself afloat at the current moment. So we recognize in the ministry that we had to do more than just ask people who are already in business what they saw as needs 10, 15, medium to long term. Now, we have noted the areas in the manifesto. There are a number of areas in the manifesto with respect to life sciences, pharmaceuticals, a number of areas identified there. But we recognize that we have to do a little better, and we thought that we would bring together persons from various areas into what we refer to as skills councils. And we are in the process of establishing the first one in renewable energy. We realize, though, that we have to do it in other areas. Now, that is one, and the program manager will expand on that. I'll also say, though, that in our ministry, we're going to pay close attention to a construct that already exists at the regional, or let me say the hemispheric level at the OAS, a collaboration between ministries of education and labor. Now, previously we have focused a lot on the labor component and not as much on the collaborative component of it. And I know that the Ministry of Education has focused on the education component. It is our intention to use that forum as well to help us with the coordination at that level while we execute on the ground the collaboration that will be necessary for us to make sure that our educational institutions recognize what's ahead of us based on work that we do with all partners, and that we are educating our people, young people, older people, but educating our people for those future responsibilities. This is important if our economic development is going to be sustained. And so we recognize that interacting with the productive sectors will be important, and we propose to do that through the skills sector councils. I'll ask Ms. Watson to speak some more on the skills sector councils and any other matters related to the collaboration as she sees fit.
Yes, thank you, Minister. Just to add in, what we recognize that in terms of really positioning Barbadians or persons in Barbados to access the future opportunities, it will be critical to have a high level of dialogue, research. We have to be information driven, and the Minister mentioned the People Development Advisory Council. That's our first level of dialogue consultation, where we're going to include the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Training will be a part of that. It's tripartite structure, so we have the workers' representatives, employer representatives, the education and training sector will be a part of that council. And that is a council that is intended to meet monthly, and from previous councils, they meet monthly, they have subcommittees that do targeted work that has been identified as a priority. Additionally, as the minister mentioned, our sector skills councils that we're looking to set up, this is going to provide a mechanism where we have, led by the private sector, where we have those industry leaders in the identified target priority sectors to let us know what's happening in the sector, what is the future developments, what is the recent trends, where are there gaps in terms of the skills, potential opportunities that will emerge, and stay on top of that. And that will inform then education and training. It will inform our career guidance work, employment promotion, how can we facilitate the employment of these persons and so on. So that is another level of consultation that will facilitate us staying on top of what's happening, the developments in the different sectors. As the minister mentioned, we have prioritized, we're starting with the renewable energy sector, but this year we have an aggressive agenda of setting up at least up to four sector councils in some of the areas that we've targeted, from discussions, dialogue with construction, tourism, and then in terms of information technology services. But that is something that even as we have further consultation and it has to change or evolve, that can change. And that work will be guiding what we're going to be doing in terms of developing and modernizing the apprenticeship system. And they're going to be guiding in terms of the changes in the education and training and other areas that we have to prioritize in terms of accessing these opportunities that are coming on board. As the minister said, there's a significant investment in terms of life sciences. So that's another area where Sector Skills Council will come and play. And this is to complement future work that we have to continuously be doing in terms of labor market analysis, see what our data is showing, but also doing some targeted research in certain areas. So it is a comprehensive approach that has to be taken so that we are better prepared, more forward thinking in our ecosystem for education and training and in terms of employment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Manager. If I may just add to say that the research we're going to be doing, I'm just circling back to what I said in the initial response to the question. We recognize that we cannot do only local research based on the limitation in terms of vision that we may encounter from time to time. And so the research we will do will involve moving beyond our shores. I mentioned hemispheric, but also it's going to be global, because we have to stay current, stay abreast of what is happening internationally, because that will impact us. It impacts how technology develops. And if we are to stay cutting edge or become cutting edge and then stay current, we will need to know what is happening and what is the vision for some of the larger players internationally. So, like Honourable Member, you spoke to what's happening in the Arab states. In some of those places, we have to, even though we are more resource constrained, we have to take a similar approach to how we determine what those new areas will be, how we are able to establish ourselves in the areas that we could have a comparative advantage, and then how we move forward in those various sectors.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. I'm glad you mentioned that, because as you rightly said, whilst our resources are constrained, our ambition certainly must not be. And I think what you and your team has outlined so far, working with us, of course, will allow for the country to always be in a moment of future-proofing the skill set necessary to navigate where we go. And just lastly, it would be on that point too, is to say that, as you may be aware, the ILO has a significant number of resources, particularly at the technical level, in helping states like ours to be able to navigate the future of these spaces.
Thank you very much. We definitely will avail ourselves more of the ILO resources. I have to confess that in spite of the significant engagement we have had over the years with the ILO, we have not made as full a use of the resources as we could have and should have. And we determined, this is sometime, I think, in 2024, as we start to prepare for the Decent Work Country program, that we would use those resources in a much more effective way to make sure that the international input that we have is, well, that the international resources, the resources out there for us to use, that we make use of them, recognizing our own constraints, but recognizing that there is help out there that can supplement our work.
All right, thank you, Honourable Member.
Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning through you to the Minister and the team from the Ministry. Minister, at your sub-program 25 is the Job Start Plus program, which had approved estimates of about 2.9 million for 2025, financial year 2025-2026. Approved estimates of 2.9 million, but revised estimates of about 1.5 million. And again, for the year 2026, 2027, the estimates that are currently before the House, a proposed appropriation of 1.5 million. I mention these numbers because it seems to me that in the last financial year, the scope may have been envisioned to be greater for the program, and perhaps you can tell us a bit about that. But also to ask a question about the effectiveness of the program, the extent to which the ministry has done any review to understand what has been its impact, what are some of the kinds of changes that might need to be made in order to realize greater impact. And I'll tell you why specifically I asked. The Job Start Plus program is exactly what it says. It is intended to be able to give a first engagement with the job market for young people. And it is not on its own in that regard, because there are similar programs across government that seek to introduce young people to training and work thereafter. I think of Construction Gateway as one of them. One of the challenges it seems these kinds of programs seem to be experiencing is the capacity of the private sector to be able to partner with the ministry or with the government to take up some of these, some of the young people. And there are real issues related to that. I do not gather that it is an absence of will. So I wanted to hear from you about what are some of the challenges the program has experienced and what are some of the ways in which you will address those challenges.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. You've identified some of the major, well, at least one of the major challenges that we have with Job Start Plus. I'll allow the program manager to speak in some more detail. But besides the fact that there are some other programs, you've identified the gateways, there's also Prince's Trust, there is the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps. There are a number of other programs that exist, and officers administering all of these programs are essentially knocking on the same doors. And so there is a challenge where that is concerned. And what it says, especially from a policy perspective, so from my perspective, we have to do better collaboration across the various ministries, across the various programs who are addressing some of the same young people, and going to many of the same potential employers. Now, Job Start Plus is slightly different from the perspective that it is designed for persons, young people, who are not in education, who are not in employment, who are not in training. Particularly those who have never had work experience. But there are some of those persons who are in some of the other programs as well. So we have that element of, it is not tension, but there is some competing in the same relatively small space. The an additional challenge we have is the amount of the stipend. And the fact that in our program was designed that medium and larger businesses would pay the entire stipend. Now, we had a big, to use maybe a colloquial term, a big lash during the COVID period. But coming out of COVID, potential employers have not gone back to a pre-COVID mindset. There's a lot more caution. Amounts that could be considered relatively small for those of us outside of those businesses are considered important. Material is probably word we would use by the businesses themselves. So we have that particular challenge. Now, the literacy that I mentioned earlier is also another of those challenges, and that's come out in the training, and that's the reason why we are putting programs in place to address that. But we have to do some better collaboration, because we need at all times to make sure that all our young people are channel guided in the right direction. We realize that, and we have sought already to have a situation where government maybe takes a little bit more of the burden of the cost. I'm careful how I say that, because I know that there are limitations with respect to government revenue and how it can be allocated. And we believe that employing organizations should recognize in a material way, just not theoretically, but in a material way, that there is a responsibility that they have to make sure that our young people are put in a position where they can, realize their potential and not resort to what may be considered antisocial type behaviors. But I will allow the program manager to speak in some more detail to the challenges maybe that she sees on an actual day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Minister. Job Start Plus, the National First Job Program, was conceptualized as a way of helping young persons get into the workplace through placements to gain this work experience. And it was supposed to be through a lot of partnerships across the private sector and the third sector. You spoke to the estimates, the budget, and the majority of the money that is spent on what we call the World of Work training and the pre-placement preparation. So the World of Work training, we have actually expanded that. It used to be 2 weeks, but it's 3 weeks of training where they cover core skills. They cover things like job search techniques. A lot of young persons don't actually have a resume, so they do resume writing, they do interview techniques. And in the expansion, we included the National Transformation Initiative in terms of citizen education. We've also included more in terms of career guidance, and this was based on feedback from our job starters. And we also introduce more of psychosocial topics like work-life balance, family conflict, and so on. And this again is feedback from our work with the job starters and observations that we made. And then we do additional core skills training, career counseling, and so on. That's where the funding really goes. And while they're doing this World of Work training, a stipend is paid to assist with the expenses of coming to the 3 weeks of training. So that's the majority of what the expenditure is about. The other parts of the budget is really based on whether we do have the placements covering the personal protective equipment, for example, the insurance that is covering them, the limited liability insurance, and so on. So that's based on the numbers that we have achieved. Since the program and this World of Work training has been going on now, we have structured it as 3 cycles of training a year. Each cycle is 3 months, monthly. So that's 9 months of training for a maximum of 30 persons per cohort. And up to date, our total is at 951 persons that have benefited from that training. And a cohort is happening all right now, actually. We also, in terms of placements and the results, the outcomes of the program, we have been having challenges with finding the partnerships, and I'm going to expand on that, but we have about, since its inception, we have placed about 410, so about a little bit short of 50% of the training. Essentially, there's different challenges with finding placements, and I will tackle it from the demand side and getting employers and so on. The capacity of our labor market and where there's opportunities really for the young persons who don't have much skills and very limited education. That's the entry-level kind of opportunity jobs that are available. The capacity of the organizations to really facilitate the kind of mentorship, the training that would be needed for young persons that don't have experience. We find our better partners are the ones who have a strong human resource management arm. So who has actual resources dedicated to human resource management, but that's not a lot of the organizations in Barbados. So things like that, we're just being able to focus on the recruitment and selection of the young persons to be placed, positioning for the supervision, the training, and so on. That has been challenging, and that's why some of the partners find it difficult to be a part, some employers find it difficult to be a part of the program. And as I said, in opportunities, we have had the biggest uptake in hospitality, manufacturing, and retail. And those are where we are finding those opportunities for the young persons. Getting more partners on board, we do believe that there is more we can do in terms of marketing the program, but we try to facilitate the process as much as possible, offering support in planning and positioning the organizations to take on the young persons. The minister mentioned helping with the cost of the stipend that are asked to pay the young persons. That is part of it. I'm sure that can bring some improvement. But we also have been observing that a lot of the placements that we have been having, especially this year, has actually been what we call the placements where there's an arrangement between government and the employer, but actually employers coming to us and filling vacancies by using our pool of job starters. So they would actually hire them in full-time jobs. And that's been happening more and more. So we think with more marketing and showing that we can facilitate recruitment and selection and offer a pool of talented young persons that have been trained and better positioned, better prepared for the workplace, that can bring some improvements in terms of our numbers. But as I mentioned, there is limited capacity in terms of really the opportunities. Some sectors simply cannot afford the inexperience. We've had a placement, for example, and it costed the company a lot of money in 1 week of that person learning. So I'm just using that to say that some organizations really don't have the scope for that learning curve, right? So that's some of the challenges in terms of finding a good fit. On the demand side also, we are, as what you mentioned, there's a number of other programs. And what we're hoping will happen, and what was also always envisioned with Job Start Plus, is that that can become the main program for work experience. So Ministry of Youth have their programs, education and training institutions have their programs. You have like Ministry of Training have their programs, but when it comes to the employment component, let Job Start Plus manage that, because it will address some of the concerns from the employers. We do have a small labor market. in terms of certain employers that are more known or larger, they get a lot of requests, and they have been saying, it'd be great if it could be coordinated in some way. And that's a way that JobStart can fit into this whole network of different youth employment programs, where you do the training and development under your respective programs, but then we can focus and manage that placement part, because it requires a certain level of support to the employers in planning for the young persons, support for their monitoring and coaching and mentoring, support in terms of helping even with the recruitment and selection. So what the Ministry of Labor can do is focus on that in the context of JobStart Plus. From the supply side, I would say
Officer, I have given you a good run.
Okay.
You would therefore need to, you have 30 seconds to wrap up. You can always come back.
And, well, some of the challenges also is in terms of we have the opportunities, but then the young persons are not necessarily interested in opportunities that we do have. So that's on the supply side. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am grateful that you allowed Ms. Watson the extra time, because I'm also grateful for the thoroughness of the answer. I think, Minister, that what I've heard from the officer really are the solutions to the challenges that you have, because what I had noted to be able to recommend, she has already recommended, which would be, given that what you started out with was twice in the original estimates for this program is twice what you ended up spending. It would seem to me that, well, it can't be done in this appropriation unless you have a very good relationship with the Minister of Finance, probably, but what it seems to me is that there needs to be more scope for the stipend to be covered under the program. And Ms. Watson has pointed to why, because these kinds of attachments are expensive to industry. So this is one area that I think should receive some attention. And then, as she had said, there's so many programs that deal with training across government. Let the training programs do the training. And have JobStart Plus be the program appropriately resourced that connects the labor market to talent. And linking it to your manpower surveys and to the work that you just referenced based on the question from the member for St. James North. If you are linking that data in terms of what is needed in industry to the first jobs for these young people, then it seems to me that you have a solution there. But this program is too important to our young people and to industry to be able to just check it as another effort that perhaps did not reach its full potential. So I'm glad to hear that you already have a solution, and I will be looking for that solution that Ms. Watson has outlined to be executed. I only have one follow-up on this issue, and I'll have to come back with my other questions. Minister, you mentioned youth programs for faith-based organizations, so still on the question of youth and opportunity. And your ministry is also responsible for ecclesiastical affairs, which I think is the connection there. Now, while faith-based organizations will now have a welcome opportunity, I'm sure, to execute programs specifically for young people, these programs, notwithstanding the monies being voted for them, will also need other kinds of resources. So the Charities Act that outlines how different kinds of organizations are able to be exempt for certain activities still only makes reference at the relevant schedule of the Act to the Anglican Church. And I think that somewhere along the line, certain language was changed, but the scope still does not allow for other kinds of faith-based organizations and other faiths and the institutions that represent them to be able to be exempt so that some of these charitable activities or some of these philanthropic activities can be supported, because we all know that it's not just about the money that you're actually spending on the program, but that if you are able to save costs in other areas, that your work, that money can go further. So I wanted to hear from you about whether there was were any plans to review that legislation and to make sure that all faith-based organizations across every faith represented in Barbados are able to benefit from the exemptions noted there.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. We have been made aware of the restriction that lies in the existing legislation, and even though the Charities Act doesn't fall within our ministry, we've started the work that will lead to a cabinet paper and a proposal to amend the Charities Act. You are correct. As a matter of fact, the memo that was sent from the Cabinet Office to all ministries speaks not any longer to ecclesiastical affairs, even though it is listed that way in these estimates, but that has to change in the final print. We are dealing with religious affairs so that there will be no discrimination, like I said, in employment, but there'll also be no discrimination with respect to various faith-based organizations. And our ministry, the ministry that I have the honor to lead, has a responsibility to be facilitator, almost in chief, for all faith-based organizations. And so the restriction in the Charities Act, I've already spoken to the Permanent Secretary about that, and the amendment will be made so that we remove that discrimination. We expect that, like with Job Start Plus, we are able, so we're doing two things at the same time. We're working on the amendment to that act, but based on our experience with Job Start Plus, we are now starting the process of putting together the terms of reference and also the structure that will allow us to be effective in making sure that any resources that we give are properly spent, but that the systems within the ministry itself are such as would allow for good governance, good supervision, good keeping track of what happens with the grants that we expect ultimately to give. Now, our intention is to have dialogue with leaders of faith-based organizations so that the ultimate structure will have the input of government and faith-based organizations so that there is ownership, not just from government because we are managing public funds, but also ownership from faith-based organizations because these are the organizations that are executing for our young people. And we will definitely be using some of the lessons learned in Job Start Plus. I'm just linking the two to make sure that these interventions, we'll be sharing those experiences as well with faith-based organizations to make sure that we get good results out of the public funds that we will be putting into this program.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, just one follow-up flowing from what the minister's response. The portal that was established, and I'm on the topic of charity and philanthropic activity, and you made reference in your opening, Minister, to the establishment of a portal, long awaited. I believe there was also meant to be a legislative framework that was adopted for that. And I ask this because there are many people who reach out across government, especially from the diaspora, asking to be able to contribute in kind or in financial resources to various efforts of government. And they encounter all kinds of challenges, either with making timely contact with ministries, with understanding what is the scope for them to be able to contribute, with issues related to duties and taxes and other kinds of exemptions. How are we finally bringing all of this into view and into a manageable program so that those people, I mean, it would be a shame to be able to turn away resources as a small economy. How are we finally coming to terms with that? What is the framework and the structure that your ministry is putting together to be able to satisfy those Barbadians and friends of Barbados who want to contribute to our development?
Thank you very much again, Honourable Member. And we know that a number of those desires to assist are desires to assist in the area of our young people and giving our young people opportunities. And so you are right that this matter has been significantly delayed. One is, and I'm just going to be careful when I say this, one was with respect to COVID, because this is actually, and this is just for transparency, even though it doesn't make me look good, but we were supposed to have had this portal in 2020. This is now 6 years past 2020. We've had some challenges along the way, one related to the COVID and the change in focus that everybody had during the COVID period. But then subsequent to that, there was the matter of the developer organization, is probably how you would phrase that. We've been trained, not for lack of training on our part, but the developer organization, it seems to have gotten lost somewhere along the line. We are back on track, and the portal is essentially designed. We're in the process of testing, because my ministry and I, as the policy lead in the ministry, we are not going to the public with anything that is not fully tested and working. So I've indicated to the team that I will be making a small donation. I want to make sure I can see it come right through before we do any kind of launch, soft or hard launch. So that is one. The legislative framework then to govern how that works, but also how organizations dealing with young people and other organizations more generally, how they're able to contribute. We had expected to have an opinion sometime around the middle of last year, but that did not happen because the government's legislative agenda is so packed that it could not be reviewed. There were some requests from us to provide information on what we had developed, but also, well, in terms of policy, because we are not yet at CPC, but what we've developed in terms of policy to guide drafting instructions and drafting instructions themselves. And we provided that to the Office of the Attorney General. And so it is now with the Office of the Attorney General what we have prepared, along with some information that could be used for comparative purposes. So when I say that, I'm referring to actual legislation which is in place in some of our Commonwealth colleague countries. That information is now with the Office of the Attorney General, and I expect that we will get a response that will allow us to move forward. Some of those challenges at the OAG included things like issues pertaining to money laundering, terrorist financing, or financing of terrorism. And there are a lot of strictures, a lot of rules from various organizations, including the EU, including the OECD, that we had to try to navigate around. And you get different responses from different areas, and trying to come up with what will satisfy all of the stakeholders, all of the important stakeholders, has been, I wouldn't say a challenge, but has taken some time. And so we are at the point now where we have a document that could serve the purpose of informing a cabinet paper, but it's actually a draft cabinet paper. And we are waiting an opinion. So this is not necessarily comment, but just a final review, because the Office of the Attorney General had some responsibility. I haven't looked at the current configuration, but has some responsibility for FATF and all the issues that attend to that. So we are working on it, actively addressing it, and we expect to be able to move it forward, the legislative part forward, but also the portal that goes along with it. We recognize the challenges that people have trying to give, and the thing is that it is not even just individuals outside the government who have difficulties. A former High Commissioner said to me that he tried to get some equipment into Barbados, and he almost felt as though he was a foreigner, quote unquote, from someplace far, because he had the same kinds of difficulties that others have experienced in terms of paperwork, getting through customs, and all that needs to happen. And our intention is that we will create the kind of structure and system that will allow potential donors to understand what is required beforehand, so that we are not in a position, well, allow them to understand what is happening beforehand, but we are also creating locally, domestically, the system that will allow the various entities that interact with donations to be able to respond in a timely manner, and not to cause it to appear that we have everything we want and we don't want nothing from nobody.
Thank you, Minister, to you and your team. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for St. Michael Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. First, I want to start off by thanking the ministry and all the hard work that it has done in advancing the rights and opportunities and welfare of the workers in Barbados. But as the minister correctly stated, there's still more work left to be done. So my question and my series of questions will be in relation to your sub-program 421, which is the Labor Department. Oftentimes I sit in my chambers and I get phone calls regarding the treatment of workers. For example, the lack of NIS payments. So they're working and the employers are taking out the NIS, but then when something happens, sickness or injury, and they go to claim their benefits, they realize that NIS has not actually been paid in. Another complaint that I often hear about would be, for example, holiday pay. They haven't been paid what they are due in accordance with the legislation. Another would be unfair dismissal. And so I'm seeing and I'm reading that the Labor Department has recorded over 1,500 complaints and more than 3,000 telephone queries relating to labor matters. But I see that out of those 1,500 complaints recorded from April to December 2025, only 20 have been referred to the Employment Rights Tribunal, and only 9 employers were prosecuted. So what my question really is what steps are being taken to reduce these disputes and strengthen enforcement of labor laws?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Prosecution is not the first step, and so the idea is not to have significant numbers of prosecutions, but to solve the issues and the challenges, vexing as they are, before we get to that point. Now, the Labor Department has had, and I'll allow the Acting Chief Labor Officer to respond as well, but just to say that the Labor Department has had its own challenges with respect to its capacity and not having enough numbers, not having enough people to be able to do all that is necessary. Now, what is necessary has to do with a number of things, but they include inspections. Inspections is a significant part of the work of a Labor Department. Labor administration really is centered on what is referred to in other places as the inspectorate. Now, I'll include the National Insurance and Social Security Service where that is concerned as well. Because the Labor Department has not been able to do all the inspection that it should be doing based on the fact that we have not had the staff complement. We have to do inspections, but there are also a lot of telephone calls that we have to field. And I really did not recognize the volume until I became minister. I, on the outside, was one of those who, because of my involvement in HR management, wondered when people were complaining that, you know, they are calling and nobody answering the phone, then to recognize that you have maybe 4 officers in the office all on the phone, but the phone is ringing. So 4 people are being attended to, but there may be 2 who will not get an answer because you are working through issues that are often contentious, but also very involved. So that was one. The other area is the matter of putting out to the public the information that could be used for them to address or find the answers to some of the questions that they call the Labor Department about. So with respect to inspections, we have received from the Prime Minister, acting as Minister of Finance, I believe as well. This is obviously before the new configuration, but permission or authorization to have additional posts in the Labor Department. That is critical, and I think that decision came in a social partnership meeting when we were discussing issues in the construction sector. I acknowledge the assistance in pushing that issue, which we received from the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union, and we have approval for some additional posts. We were also able, through the Prime Minister's intervention as well, to push the process a little faster when we were allowed to put out advertisements and do some interviewing. Because before that authorization was given, there was a bottleneck at the level of the Ministry of the Public Service. And so we've been able to move forward more speedily in terms of our resourcing. Now, we are not yet where we are supposed to be. There is still some additional sign-off to happen at the level of the Minister of the Public Service, but the new Minister of the Public Service has assured me that she will be addressing the matter as a matter of urgency, so I have no doubt that we will be able to move forward where that is concerned. With respect to sharing with the public, we have not done as good a job as we could, but again, with resource constraints, that the priority becomes those who are calling, those who have emailed, those who have come to the office. And so having the information put out into the public domain has taken a hit, but we recognize that we need specific resource where that is concerned, and in the estimates, there is some funding on the professional fees to allow us to have, I think that's under general management though, not under this subhead, but to allow us to have the resource that will allow us to push more information into the public domain. What I saw, in terms of, and let's talk about the kind of calls that we get. What I saw when I was involved in the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association, I did not expect that I would see repeated. And the issue there was, every year, people would call with respect to public holidays and how they're supposed to pay on public holidays. Now, those of us involved believe that everybody knows that. But when it was helping to lead the BHTA, there are people who would call every year and ask the same question. And we have similar in employers, across employers generally, but also workers who are questioning what is happening in terms of if they're being treated according to law. So we have to put more information out, and we have to be consistent in that, and that is an area that we will be focusing on in the next fiscal year to move that matter forward. The National Insurance and Social Security Service, now the service is aware about how I feel with respect to inspections, and I have mandated that we go back to what used to happen in the old days, because I remember as an employer, when National Insurance, well, back then I used to suck my teeth, now I'm the minister responsible. So, but the inspections that employers used to have, we need to have many more of those. There will be a continuing challenge that we will continually have to address, and that is when more and more people move into both self-employment, but also becoming employers in their own small businesses, then you have increasing numbers of establishments to deal with. That is the reality. We will have to be equal to the reality. And so I'm happy that we've been able to get the approval for the additional resources, and that will go a long way into addressing the matters raised by the Honourable Member in terms of issues that keep coming up. I'll end by speaking to a challenge, and this came up yesterday at an event I had for my canvassers and workers. Oftentimes, I as minister, I as MP, but also the Labour Department officers receive complaints, and in an effort, before we attempt to address them, the complainant will say, I don't want you to call my name, because people are fearful, and we understand that. When a matter will refer directly to a person as opposed to a group, it becomes difficult to communicate with the employer and raise the issue when the raising of the issue will point to a specific individual. And those are some of the issues we have. But like I've said before, those constraints, those challenges notwithstanding, we recognize what we have to do with respect to protecting workers, the human beings who build establishments and who are looking to be treated fairly, as all human beings should. And we will intensify our efforts to make sure that the issues, the challenges that workers have are properly addressed. I'll ask the acting chief to speak to the matter as well.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Honourable Member. Good morning. My name is Alison Elka. I'm the Acting Chief Labour Officer. With respect to the efforts we are putting in place to reduce disputes and strengthen enforcement, I have to first explain that our approach has been up to this time to prioritize the handling of complaints when persons visit the Labour Department. And so the Industrial Relations section, the officers have always been mostly in the office to deal with, as you can see from the numbers, the hundreds of persons who either call in or visit the department. So that reactive response has given some success in addressing these matters. However, what we are doing at this point going forward is to place greater emphasis on field work, going out to do more inspections and to engage in more public education. We do conduct some seminars. Our view is that by educating both the workers and the employers of the requirements of the legislation, there should be increased compliance with the legislation and therefore reduction in complaints in time. But we also recognize that through those public education efforts and workplace inspections, we can anticipate that there will be an increase in complaints because persons may become more aware and they may therefore then come to the department to complain more. But in time, through our public education and the use of social media, the development of frequently asked questions published on the ministry's website, we will be able to direct persons to get some of the questions answered early, and that would help us to at least eliminate a portion of those persons visiting or calling the department. Moral suasion has worked relatively well to a point, but we do recognize that it is not as effective as it has been in the past, so we will have to take a different approach, and while prosecution will always be the last resort, we believe that we may very well have to engage in that more and more. So the focus really is on the industrial relations section in particular, being engaged in more field activity and being out there doing inspections, more public engagement, not only through seminars, but through short bits of information being shared. And to ensure that our staff is able to perform those functions well, we're also addressing the staff development. Thank you.
If I may just mention something that I mentioned it in this chamber in the second half of 2023. I want to use this opportunity, and I'm using this opportunity to encourage workers to use the NIS portal as well to monitor the remittance of their contributions. I'm not saying that to remove any responsibility from the Inspectorate of the National Insurance and Social Security Service, but I'm saying to the public through you, Mr. Chair, that we'd like workers across the country to monitor their accounts to make sure that when national insurance contributions are deducted, that they're actually remitted to the National Insurance and Social Security Service and to the National Insurance Fund, which the service manages.
Thank you. I'm happy to have the presence here of the acting CLO because I do have a constituent who would have written a letter since 2024 and has not gotten a hearing date as yet. So I'm happy to have you here, but I will let him know that he needs to come in person so that his issue be prioritized. Now, I do hear you in terms of education, but as we lawyers would say, ignorance of the law is not an excuse. So while education is important, what I think is equally important is enforcement mechanisms. And seeing here that it's reported that there were 467 dismissal claims received and 370 unpaid holiday pay claims, and this is just during the period of April to December 2025. What I am interested to hear is what enforcement mechanisms would be put in place to ensure that there's adequate protection for workers' rights.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. The enforcement mechanisms are outlined in the law, and they refer to various penalties when there is non-compliance with various actions. Now, I'll give an example of one that comes to me as MP quite often. A person speaks to being mistreated or being unfaired. So I'm not talking about unfair dismissal, but just what is seen as unfair treatment. The challenge there, which is what we have to share with people from time to time, workers from time to time, is that we don't legislate against somebody. Just let me do an extreme just to prove the point. Somebody who passes in front of you every day, a supervisor who passes in front of you every day and looks at you stink and sucks their teeth. There's no legislation to deal with that. Matters of unfair dismissal, clear. Holiday with pay, clear. Pay for vacation leave. Matters related to severance and calculations. Matters related to notice and notice periods. They're all in the information is there in terms of how to proceed with prosecution. There was one area, and this related to Social Security, where I still feel that we could do some strengthening. So all that I've said is not to say that our legislation has every thing tied off properly. In Social Security, there are a few areas where we could tighten on the enforcement side. However, my own review as a non-lawyer, but hearing from the officers who are legally trained, is that there is enough that we could be more effective. Sometimes, well, let me go a different direction as well. In terms of the legal resources that we have, we got, for the first time in my tenure as minister, a legal officer in the ministry about maybe 2 years ago, just over a year ago. But we have quite a lot of labor law to address. Now, so we have now a legal officer, and we have permission to have a second officer. That will allow us to address issues in enforcement, but particularly with what I refer to as a deterrent. So that if the penalty is only $200, then a person, an employer may decide, well, I don't really care about that, they're going to take long to court anyhow and that kind of stuff. If the penalty is more substantive, more substantial, then it may operate and act as a deterrent. And updating the labor laws to increase the deterrent power is what we are working on at the moment. We are also, maybe I should use this opportunity to speak to the fact that in our manifesto, but it is something that we were working on even before that time, before the manifesto was issued, because it is in our Decent Work Country program, which we signed last year, and that is the creation of a labor code. Creating that labor code will allow us to update a lot of our legislation. Maybe, I should probably use the word en masse. No, that's not a legal term. So that may be the wrong way to put it, but that's how a layman sees it. To do a lot of pieces of legislation, update them one time as we create the labor code for the country. So I give the assurance that we've already spoken to the International Labour Organization office in Trinidad. The ILO has assisted a number of Caribbean countries already with both strengthening legislation and creating labor codes. And we have the political party that I have canvassed as a member of, I'm just remembering the legislation on crossing. I've canvassed as a member of the Barbados Labour Party, and we put out a manifesto, and the manifesto speaks to creating a labor code. That is work that the ministry has already started to embark on, and will continue to make sure that we can update the legislation so that it is as robust as is necessary to address as many issues as can be addressed in legislation.
Thank you. I think that would help, but equally, we need to remember that even though we may have the legislative framework, the key is still enforcing that legislation as well. Because you may have the tools, but if no one is enforcing, that's the key word, if no one is enforcing what is already there, then you will have persons slipping through the cracks who would have, you know, fell default of that legislation. So my final, I'm aware I have 3 questions. My final question would be, in law, we say justice delayed is justice denied. So what I want to know from the ministry is, what plans does the ministry have to improve the response times to worker complaints and ensure that workers who feel unfairly treated receive timely justice?
Honourable Member, is this your follow-up question? Because you would have had a question before.
Yes, Chair, this is my 3rd follow-up question.
Okay, you may proceed. Thank you.
I will help you, Chair, in turning it into a follow-up question properly, to say that we're talking about worker, I'm using the umbrella of worker, helping the honourable member, worker complaints. Now, the matter of access to justice and timely access to justice is one that we take very seriously. The acting chief is going to speak to it, but let me go beyond the work within the Labor Department proper to also speak to what is happening with respect to the Employment Rights Tribunal. And I'm just going to repeat what I said when the Ministry of Housing was in the well. One of the constraints we've had related to a home for the tribunal. We were initially supposed to have been housed in the complex in, is that Corey Street? I don't remember, the old Supreme Court building that was redone. Then that did not work out. And for quite some time, we were to be accommodated in the Warren's office complex. Now, I raised the matter when the Ministry of Housing was in the well, and I'm happy to report that on the weekend, on Saturday, and maybe Saturday and Sunday, I received a number of photographs showing cranes, showing containers, indicating that customs, which was really the culprit, keeping their boxes, their old boxes in the area because they did not want to contaminate their brand new headquarters, but not recognizing that it was impacting the delivery of labor justice in the country. But we are at the point where they are now moving their tacklings, and the Ministry of Housing, maybe as a result of the intervention in the well, is moving ahead to make sure that we can have a home so that the three tribunals can meet simultaneously if necessary. We've established a full-time tribunal, and we are moving toward that point where delays will be minimized. Where the Labor Department itself is concerned, because the Employment Rights Tribunal is well managed through the Labor Department, is separate, independent. The acting chief will speak to what is happening within the Labor Department itself.
Thank you, Minister. The Labor Department regards every complaint as important, and we try to treat to them as quickly as possible. But the reality is, with the volume, there is a challenge. So we try our best to manage expectations. The estimates brief indicates that between April and December 2025, there were 1,511 complaints received at the Labor Department. In 2026, January, there were 147. In February, 168. And last week alone, there were 49. And those are just persons who walked into the department. So every month, officers are dealing with a couple dozen new complaints. Let me make that clear. New complaints. Every complaint has to be investigated. A person comes in, a worker comes in, an employee comes in, they make a complaint. We have to investigate it to hear and to get the fullness of the situation. And there can be delays with those investigations for good reason. So officers are balancing the complaint, the investigation, the conciliation meetings, and still trying to get out there to do the inspections I just mentioned to ensure that there is compliance with the legislation. So it is difficult. And as a result, there will be times when things appear to be moving slowly on that matter, but somebody else's matter is being advanced. There's also the officers in the Labor Department. Most of them have been in the department for less than 5 years. And through experience, we know it takes 3 to 5 years for an officer to have full competence and confidence, and we're working to reduce that time frame. So once we investigate the complaint, we're satisfied that is something that some action needs to be taken, the conciliation process is followed through in relation to dismissal claims. In relation to the holiday with pay claims, after the investigation, efforts are made to ensure that the employers comply, and in the majority of cases, employers will pay the outstanding holiday pay, and if they don't, then they're prosecuted. And that's done with the support of, up to this point, with the support of the Director of Public Prosecution's Office. As Minister said, we are working towards having internal resources more involved in that process so that we can have a more timely movement, because obviously the DPP has to manage their own volume and and manage that with the variety of cases that they have to deal with. So we're doing everything that we can to balance the investigations, the meetings, and ensuring enforcement, not only through getting out in the field and make sure that problems are corrected before they reach the department, but also to recommend or pursue prosecution where it is required.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 10 minutes past 12.
That this honorable chamber be suspended until 12:10 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 12:10 p.m.